Brian Hartline might be the most valuable assistant coach in college football in terms of non-play calling assistant coaches. And now he is about to take his crack at becoming the most valuable coordinator in college football altogether. Ryan Day, after losing Chip Kelly to the NFL, has promoted Brian Hartline to not just offensive coordinator. He already held that role, but now he will be calling plays for Ohio State in 2025. And Stefan, I think I love this move. The more I think about what it is, if you look back 2 years ago, Ryan Day made Brian Hartline an offensive coordinator. Now, granted, that was more about the raise that came with the role than it was about the responsibilities of play calling. And Ryan Day was at least thinking about giving up play calling. If that spring you weren't here yet, but they kind of had a trial run with Brian Hartline being the offensive play caller, and they came out of that. It was very clear that maybe Hartline wasn't ready for that, but also maybe Ryan Day, wasn't ready to give up play calling. It was probably a two-way street in that situation. And then when he finally is ready to give it up after that season going into 2024, he gets Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien heads off to Boston College. He brings in his mentor, Chip Kelly, who was probably the perfect person for Ryan Day to head down that path with of giving up play calling. And now after a year of getting used to life without it and 2 years of maybe preparing Brian Hartline for this, maybe this was 2 years in the making and Brian Hartline's ready to do this now.
Yeah, it seems like all these timelines have kind of worked out perfectly for Ohio State. You know, you go back to last year when Ryan Day hired Chip Kelly, you could tell kind of then and definitely now as we've heard Ryan Day talk about Chip Kelly's departure that this timeline was always bring in Chip, win a national championship, then Chip can stay or he can pursue the NFL, which he obviously ended up doing going to the Raiders. And now you look at this and you say, well, yeah, that timeline sure does add up a ton with, okay, now it's Brian Hartline's turn, right? Like he's had 6 total seasons of being under Ryan Day. He's had 1 season of being under Chip Kelly. I mean, there's not many offensive minds better in college football to learn from in that aspect. So it's perfectly set up for him. And there's 2 aspects to this of one for Ryan Day. It was a big deal to give up play calling, but I think everyone kind of looked at it and say, well, it's a little bit easier when the guy you're giving it up to is not just offensive guru Chip Kelly, but it's also Chip Kelly, the guy who Ryan Day knows, who's basically said, you know, has kind of considered him like a second father to him. And then on the flip side, you have the Brian Hartline aspect where not only was Ryan comfortable giving it to Chip Kelly, but now he's comfortable giving it to someone else. Maybe Chip Kelly kind of taught him in an inadvertent way about, you know, being able to grow some trust with someone calling plays for your offense. And you know, Andrew talked about it when we did Buckeye Talk earlier this week of it feels a little bit like now or never for Brian Hartline. And I don't know if that's entirely true. Like if Chip had come back for another 2 years, like Brian Hartline could have been the offensive coordinator 3 years from now. It didn't have to happen this year, but it does kind of line up to, okay, this is the perfect opportunity for Ryan Day to make that move and for Brian Hartline to be that guy. And I think around Ohio State, there's going to be a lot of confidence about, you know, his ability. We see what he can do on a recruiting front. We see how he can develop players. We've also seen that Ohio State needs to get the ball to these receivers, and I'm pretty confident Brian Hartline is going to do that. Like, you don't think Brian Hartline is going to be in a meeting room saying, hey, let's design a play to give it to Jeremiah Smith because, you know, I recruited that 5-star guy and I know exactly how good he is. So this is the perfect move, and I think it's someone that Ryan Day can trust. And I'm really interested to see, you know, kind of how Brian Hartline blossoms as a play caller. It's felt like year after year, he's kind of that top assistant in the country where something's big going to happen, right? Like we've seen him linked to the West Virginia opening. Like he's being talked about in head coaching realms, and he hasn't even been an offensive play caller yet. Like this is a great step for him and his career progression. I think it's going to be big for Ohio State.
He's trading in his football dad for his football little brother. 7 years younger than him. They've been together for 9 years because Brian Hartline was in a GA role when Ryan Day got here as the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach in 2017. He takes over as the interim wide receivers coach in 2018 when Brian Day is still an assistant coach here. One of the first things Ryan Day did immediately after being hired as the head coach is make that interim a full-time gig, and we've seen how that's paid off. You're right. Brian Hartline has proven to be elite at every single facet of what it means to be a position coach in college football, recruiting and development. Now this is about, can he prove to be elite in the schematic part of it, and that's the play calling element of this. I do think, though, they're going to throw the ball a lot this up and coming year. So having a receivers coach be your offensive coordinator, probably helps, especially when, again, Ryan Day's right there. So if there's a need for Ryan Day to step back into it, he can do it. I don't know if he's going to need to do it. I'm not going to for sure say he will or he won't, because, again, Brian Hartline's never done this before. So we don't know how it's going to go. And his debut is going to be against a top 10 opponent at home, against Texas. But those are two guys who are elite at the passing game. And you just lost the two assistant coaches who were probably the spearheaders of your running game, and Chip Kelly and Justin Fry. So I do think it puts a little bit more emphasis on whoever your offensive line coach is. They've got to really have a mind for the run game, because what you can't do is go backwards. This was one of the best running games in the country, even after some of the injuries. Once they figured some things out, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins had 1,000 yards each this season. You can't go take a step back from that because you lost the two guys who were most entrusted in structuring that. Right, Carlos Loughlin as well played a role in Ryan Day, but those two were the spearheaders of that. So it puts some emphasis on where is Ryan Day going to go with an offensive line coach. But at least from you're talking about storylines here, narratives. Once again, shout out to Chip Kelly. Is that a narrative? It does seem like there was a bit of Brian Hartline was maybe not ready to do this 2 years ago, and Ryan Day wasn't ready to give it up. So you had a small step between those two things happening. Of Chip Kelly comes in and is the perfect person for Brian Hartline, can spend a year learning and seeing up close and personal what it looks like when with an offensive coordinator who's not just a head coach, because Brian Day is also a head coach. Chip Kelly's just the offensive coordinator. So you can see what it looks like to put together a game plan and what it looks like to call plays and learn that, while Ryan Day got to get comfortable being a CEO. So maybe now in 2015, these two who have been linked together since Ryan Day got to Columbus, first as an assistant and then as a head coach, are ready to take this thing into the next era of the guy who is responsible for a lot of the reasons for why your offense has been the way it is, and that's this receiver play. He is now the guy you are entrusting with the keys to that very car.
Yeah, and Ryan, you think about Ohio State at the same time, particularly under Ryan Day, getting to 10 wins has never been an issue, right? Mm-hmm. So can Brian Hartline be a good enough offensive coordinator to get you to 10, 11 wins in the regular season? I think there's no question about that, right? Like there's no doubt Ryan Day as a head coach is consistently getting Ohio State to that point. I don't think Brian Hartline can do anything to hurt it that much that, you're winning 8-9 games. If that's the case, you're getting to the playoff every year. And Ryan Day showed us that once the playoff comes around, he's got time to be more involved in some of those X's and O's. So if there are questions about Brian Hartline, like Ryan Day can easily step in as the games get amplified and help out with that. So there's no reason to believe that just because it's not Chip Kelly, just because it's not Ryan Day calling plays, that when the postseason rolls around, when the games matter most, that Ryan Day is not going to be heavily involved. We saw him get heavily involved with the defense after the Oregon game. Like there's no doubt that Ryan Day is going to be right there for both of these coordinators, but especially Brian Hartline, as needed, especially as the games ramp up toward the end of the season. So I think Ohio State's in a fine spot, and I'm excited to see the growth that Brian Hartline can make from this move.
What a journey. Ohio State wide receiver turned 1,000-yard NFL receiver who never wanted to coach is now the offensive coordinator at Ohio State. It should be, it's a good way to say, hey, JJ, your guy's not going anywhere. Carnell, your guy's not going anywhere. In fact, he's now going to be the guy you yell at when you want the ball. Get the text 614-350-3315.
But when you think about recruiting too, like yes, this staff is losing two valuable pieces. The recruiting on the offense is going to be just fine.
For sure.
Carlos Loughlin's there. Quarterbacks are going to show up because of Ryan Day. Receivers are going to show up because of Brian Hartline, no matter what role he's in. And offensive line, as good as Fry was, the recruiting wasn't necessarily off the charts to where you even if the next guy is just as good at recruiting, you've shown you can win a national title with it. So this staff, despite all these changes on offense, is still in a pretty good spot as it comes to recruiting. And when you can recruit guys like Jeremiah Smith, I think you're going to be all right.
Now, with that being said, best case scenario, Brian Hartline's really good at this, just like he's been really good at everything else. Worst case scenario, you have another Kerry Combs situation where elite position coach, elite developer, elite recruiter, not so great schemer. And that didn't work well with Kerry Combs. And so that's what you don't want. So you have to leave room for that because, again, Brian Hartline has never done this, just like Kerry Combs had never done this as well. But I like the odds with Brian Hartline and at least being good enough to your point, the talent in itself mixed with decent play callers should get you 10, 11 wins. It's whether or not Brian Hartline is as good as a schemer and as good as a play caller as he has been at everything else. Has he learned enough over the last 7 years to put him in a position to be as good as everything else, to where this isn't about August, September, October, really even November anymore. It's about January and December. Can he show up in those moments? And I guess that's what we'll be finding out this summer, and that's what we'll be finding out this offseason and the 2025 season. Get the text, 614-350-3315. 2-week free trial, $3.99. After that, this was a YouTube version of Buckeye Talk. I'm Steven. That's Stefan. Go check us out on Buckeye Talk wherever you find podcasts.